I have a bowl of soup I make every Thanksgiving. Butternut squash, a little nutmeg, the recipe from my mother's handwritten card that's so old the ink has faded in places. I've made it every year for 31 years. My daughter-in-law took one look at it last November, wrinkled her nose, and said, "That looks like something from a can." She didn't even taste it. I remember standing in my own kitchen, holding the ladle, and just going very still inside. The way you go still when something happens that you already knew was coming but hoped you were wrong about. I didn't say anything. I smiled, set the ladle down, and went to check on the rolls. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not the marriage, that wasn't mine to decide, but something else. The arrangement, the generosity that had quietly become expected, then demanded, then taken for granted so completely that she didn't even bother to pretend anymore. My name is Sylvia, and I'm 64 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in a house I bought myself 22 years ago when I was 42, newly divorced and running a small catering business out of a commercial kitchen I rented by the hour. I want to tell you this story from the beginning because the beginning matters. You can't understand what I did and why I have no regrets without knowing how I got here. My son Andrew is 36. He has my father's jaw and his father's stubbornness and, thankfully, his own good heart most of the time. I raised him alone from the time he was 14, when his father and I finally admitted what we'd both known for years. We were better as friends than as spouses. His father remarried. Andrew stayed with me. Those years, just the two of us, were hard and full and good. We ate a lot of pasta. We watched a lot of baseball. We talked about everything. When Andrew was 28, he brought home a woman named Claudette. She was 31, from a family in Greenville, South Carolina. Not wealthy, but comfortable. The kind of comfortable that comes from always having someone else handle the difficult parts. She was pretty in a carefully maintained way, always put together, always just slightly overdressed for wherever we were. She worked in marketing at a mid-sized company downtown, a job she described whenever it came up, as just for now. I tried to love her. I really did. I brought her into my kitchen. I shared my recipes. I asked about her family, her childhood, her opinions. She was polite enough, in the way that people are polite when they're sizing you up. Looking back, I can see exactly what was happening. I just didn't want to see it then. Andrew proposed in the spring of his 29th year. I cried because that's what you do, and because I genuinely wanted him to be happy. When they came to me a few weeks later to talk about the wedding, I expected to write a check. I put money aside for years for exactly this. A modest fund, enough for a nice celebration. I'd been setting aside $200 a month since he was in high school. 18 years of setting aside. I had right around $43,000 saved. I told them the number. I said, "Here's what I have. It's yours. And whatever you plan within that is the wedding you'll have." Claudette went quiet in a way that made the air in the room change. "We were thinking," Andrew said carefully, "something a little more substantial." They had found a venue, a restored estate outside of Asheville, the kind of place with a long driveway and a greenhouse and a catering minimum that would have made my mother faint. The total budget they put together, flowers, photographer, rehearsal dinner, the dress, the band, a honeymoon in Portugal, came to just over $94,000. I looked at my son. He looked at the table. I should have said no. I want to be honest with you about that. I should have said, "That's not a wedding, that's a production, and I love you. But I'm not funding a production." I should have said, "Here's $43,000. Build something beautiful inside of it." Instead, I said, "Let me see what I can do." By then, my catering business had grown considerably. I'd stopped renting the commercial kitchen 12 years earlier and opened my own. I had a staff of 11, a solid reputation in the region, and enough steady income that a $94,000 hit wouldn't destroy me. It would just set me back. I told myself Andrew was worth it. I told myself it was once in a lifetime. I paid for the wedding. Claudette wore a dress that cost $6,800. She carried flowers that cost more than my first car. She danced on a dance floor installed in a greenhouse lit with string lights and candles, surrounded by 140 people eating food that was not, I noticed, made by my catering company. She had hired someone else. A detail I discovered 3 weeks before the event when I overheard her on the phone with the coordinator. She said my food was too homey. I said nothing. I wrote the check. They moved in with me after the honeymoon. Andrew had been living in an apartment across town, a perfectly decent 2-bedroom that he was paying for himself. Their plan, presented to me as mostly a done deal, was to live with me while they saved to buy a house. 6 months, Andrew said. Maybe 8. I have a 4-bedroom house. I work from home some days. The guest suite has its own bathroom. I said yes. The 6 months became a year. The year became 18 months. And somewhere in those 18 months, something shifted in a way I didn't fully register until it had already happened. Claudette stopped working. Not immediately. She went part-time first, citing stress, and then she took what she called a mental health break that extended through the fall. I didn't press. I understood burnout. I had lived burnout. But the break became permanent, and no one said so out loud. And the subject of when she might return to work became one of those topics that existed in the house like a piece of furniture. Everyone walked around without mentioning. She had time now to redecorate. That's how she put it when I came home on Tuesday to find 3 large boxes in the hallway and my sideboard. A piece I had refinished myself 20 years ago, the wood from a barn sale in Tennessee, moved to the garage. I found something perfect for that wall, she said. The sideboard was a little rustic. I thought you'd appreciate the update. I stood in my hallway looking at the empty wall where my sideboard had been for 2 decades, and I said, very quietly, please put it back. She blinked at me, like I'd said something unreasonable. It's already in the garage tonight, I said. Please put it back tonight. Andrew put it back. He didn't say much. He had developed by then a habit of smoothing things over, a kind of permanent diplomatic neutrality that I had watched settle over him like weather. He didn't argue with her. He didn't argue with me. He moved between us like a man walking through a room with low ceilings, always slightly ducked. I started noticing the smaller things after that. The way she spoke to me in my own kitchen as though she were the one who lived there and I were the guest. The way she scheduled dinners with her mother, a woman named Rita, who drove up from Greenville with some frequency without mentioning it to me and then expressed mild surprise when I had pans of my own. The way she referred to my dishes, my collections, my choices in the house as a lot or cluttered. Or once, in earshot of her friend on the phone, very grandma. I am a grandmother. But that's not what she meant. There were 100 small things over those 18 months. I could give you a list, but what mattered wasn't any single thing. It was the accumulation, the way each small thing built on the last one, until the weight of it was just the atmosphere of my house, always present, something I breathed every day without quite naming it. And then came Thanksgiving, my mother's recipe. That looks like something from a can. I set down the ladle and went to check on the rolls, and I understood, with a clarity I hadn't had before, that I had been waiting for permission to stop, permission to say enough. And she had just given it to me without knowing it, over butternut squash soup. Her mother, Rita, was there that week. She had arrived on Tuesday, announced she needed to rest after the drive, and settled into my second guest room without anyone asking me if that was all right. By Wednesday, she was giving me opinions about my kitchen organization. By Thursday, she was sitting at my dining room table eating the soup she hadn't cooked, while Claudette told me it looked like it came from a can. I ate my dinner. I was pleasant. I helped clean up. I said good night. I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed doing math I'd been avoiding. The wedding, $94,000. 18 months of groceries, utilities, the kind of household costs that dissolve into the background until you add them up. Roughly $28,000. The times I had helped with their car insurance, The weekend trip I'd funded to Charleston because Claudette mentioned she needed a break. The new couch they'd bought that I was asked to go halves on for a living room in my own house. Another $9,000 or so. The salary Andrew drew from my catering business. Fair pay, he earned it. But the raises I'd given him out of love rather than pure business sense. I wasn't making a case for regret. I was just looking at what I had allowed, what I had enabled, what I had made so easy for them that they had stopped being able to see it. By Friday morning, I had a plan. I called my accountant, a man named Gerald who has worked with me for 14 years and has heard me say, I know this is unconventional enough times that he doesn't flinch anymore. I told him what I needed. He said he'd have the paperwork ready by Monday. I called my attorney. Same conversation. I didn't call anyone else. Not my sister in Charlotte who would have told me to pray on it. Not my friend Deborah who would have cried. Not Andrew. I spent Friday and Saturday behaving exactly as I always did. I made coffee. I asked after everyone's plans. I helped Rita find the extra blankets for the guest room like I had all the time in the world, and no particular feelings about it. Sunday after lunch with everyone at the table, I asked Andrew if we could talk privately, just the two of us, that evening. Claudette asked if everything was okay. Perfectly fine, I said. I smiled. Just some business things. That evening, I sat with my son in my study, the room where I keep my mother's recipe cards and the framed photo of Andrew at 4 years old eating an entire slice of pie with his hands, and I told him gently, clearly, and without crying, what was going to change. He was no longer on the catering company's payroll as a salaried employee. I had restructured. He would be welcome to stay on as a contracted consultant at market rate, which I'd had Gerald calculate, and which was, in fact, slightly higher per hour than what he'd been earning. But it was based on actual hours worked, not a standing arrangement. The family plan that had covered both his and Claudette's cell phones was ending. I had prepaid 2 months as a courtesy so they could make other arrangements. He and Claudette needed to find their own housing. I was giving them 60 days, which was more than the 30 required by North Carolina law, because I loved him and wanted the transition to be reasonable. I had already asked around and had 3 apartment complexes to recommend, all within 10 miles, all in a range I knew they could afford. And I was changing the access code to the house. Not that night. In 60 days. But he should know. Andrew looked at me for a long time without speaking. I watched him go through it. The surprise, the hurt, the flicker of anger, and then something else. Something more tired. Mum, he said finally. Is this about the soup thing? I looked at him. Andrew, I said. This is about everything. He was quiet. I love you more than anything in this world, I said. You know that. I want you to have a good life. I want you to be happy. But I have spent the last 2 years making myself very easy to take advantage of, and I am done doing that. Not because I'm angry. Because I love you too much to keep doing it. He didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He sat with it. That's one of the things I raised in him that I'm most proud of. The ability to sit with something uncomfortable instead of running from it. Where is this coming from? He asked. The sideboard, I said. The catering company she didn't hire for the wedding. The soup. Rita in my guest room, without anyone asking me. All of it, the whole 2 years. I paused. I should have said something sooner. That's on me. But I'm saying it now. He nodded slowly. He looked like he was doing math of his own. I'll talk to her, he said. You can talk to whoever you like, I said. But the plan doesn't change. Claudette did not take the news quietly. I heard them from my bedroom that night. Not words, just the shape of an argument, her voice rising and his staying lower. At one point, there was a long silence. Then her voice again, sharp and brief. Then nothing. She came to me the next morning while I was making coffee. She had the look of someone who had prepared what they were going to say. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she started. There hasn't, I said. I poured my coffee. I didn't pour one for her, which I noticed her notice. Would you like to sit down? She sat. She explained, calmly at first, that this was a very difficult time, that they were saving, that the housing market was impossible, that she had been dealing with a great deal of stress, that she felt this decision was very sudden and perhaps made in a moment of emotion. It wasn't, I said. I've been thinking about this for a long time. But the timing is 60 days, I said, which is generous. Her jaw tightened. After everything we've been through together as a family, I set down my coffee cup. Claudette, I said, not unkindly, I paid for your wedding. I gave you a home for nearly 2 years. I stocked this kitchen, paid the utilities, put your phones on my account. I've done a great deal for this family. I'm asking now that you and Andrew build your own. I paused. That's not punishment. That's just what's next. She looked at me with something in her eyes that I think she meant as contempt. I have been looked at with contempt before. It passes. She left the kitchen. I finished my coffee. I called Deborah and we talked for an hour, and she cried a little, the way I knew she would, and it helped. Rita left that week. Without much fanfare, she just packed her bags on Wednesday, and Andrew drove her back to Greenville. Claudette was quiet for most of the 60 days. Not warm, not hostile. Just quiet, in the way of someone who knows they've lost a particular argument and is regrouping. Andrew came to me 3 weeks in, not to negotiate. He had stopped trying to negotiate after the first week. He came to apologize. He sat in the kitchen while I was prepping for an event, dicing onions, which gave us both an excuse not to look directly at each other. And he said, I let it go on too long. I should have said something. So should I said. She's not a bad person, Mum. I know that, I said. And I meant it. Claudette isn't bad. She's someone who was never asked to be accountable, and so she didn't know how. That's its own kind of tragedy. I want your marriage to work, I told him. Genuinely. But I can't want it more than you do, and I can't fund it indefinitely. He nodded. He picked up a knife and helped me dice the celery. We've always been okay in the kitchen together. They moved out on day 58, a 2-bedroom apartment in West Asheville. Not luxurious, but not bad. Real wood floors, a little balcony, close to a coffee shop Andrew likes. Claudette got a job interview the week after they moved. She told me herself, almost casually, when she came to get the last of their things. I told her I hoped it went well, and I meant that too. Andrew calls me twice a week. On Tuesdays we talk about the business. On Sundays we just talk. Last month he came over and we watched the baseball game together and ate the leftover soup from the container in my fridge. And he said, without looking at me, "This is really good, Mum." I know, I said. The sideboard is still in the hallway where it belongs. I've been refinishing the top. There were some scratches from when it was moved to the garage. I'm using a technique I found in an old woodworking book, slow work, and the grain is coming back beautifully. My friend Deborah asked me once, in the middle of all of this, if I felt guilty, if I worried I was being too hard. I thought about it honestly. I said no, not because I'm without softness. I think you can hear that I'm not. But because what I did was not hardness. It was honesty. It was long overdue, and I should have done it sooner. And my son and his wife are both, I believe, better for it. I said that to Deborah, and then I said, the most loving thing I ever did for Andrew wasn't paying for his wedding or giving him a home or getting him a job. It was finally, at 63, telling him the truth, she cried. Of course she did. I did too, a little, but only after I hung up. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually costs to say nothing, not the big silences, not the dramatic ones where you're clearly swallowing something enormous. I mean the small ones, the polite ones, the ones that feel, at the time, like kindness, like patience, like being the bigger person. I did that for nearly 2 years. I smiled when my sideboard got moved to the garage. I kept cooking. I kept paying. I told myself that love means giving people room, that families are complicated, that if I just stayed steady and generous, things would find their way to okay. What I didn't understand then, what I understand now, at 64, with the sideboard back in the hallway and the grain coming in beautifully, is that silence isn't neutral. Every time I said nothing, I was saying something. I was saying, this is acceptable. I was saying, you can do this again. I was teaching Claudette, without meaning to, that there were no real limits here, that I would absorb whatever came. And the thing about people who've never been asked to be accountable is that they will keep going until something stops them. Not because they're monsters, just because nothing has shown them the wall yet. Andrew knew, somewhere. I think he'd known for a while. But he'd learned from watching me that the thing to do was stay quiet and smooth it over. And that's the part that kept me up at night. Not Claudette's behaviour, but the way I had modelled endurance as a virtue without ever showing him what it looked like to say enough. I had taught my son, by example, to duck his head and keep walking. That's not something I'm proud of. What I did in November wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. Though I understand why it might look that way from the outside. It was just, finally, honesty. Clear, specific, grounded honesty about what I was willing to do and what I wasn't. About what was mine and what I was choosing to share and on what terms. There's a kind of intelligence in that, I think. Not cleverness, not strategy. Just the willingness to look at a situation clearly without flinching and say, this is what is actually happening here. I had the resources to keep going indefinitely. I could have funded that arrangement for years. The question was never whether I could. It was whether I should. And the answer, when I finally let myself hear it, was no. Because enabling someone's dependence isn't love. It looks like love. It feels like love. It feels like love, especially if you're tired and you just want peace. But it isn't. It's just postponement. Claudette got a job interview the week after they moved. She told me herself, standing in my hallway with a box of her things, almost as an aside. I told her I hoped it went well. I meant it. I still mean it. She's not a bad person. She just needed the postponement to end. Andrew calls on Tuesdays and Sundays. Last month he came over and ate my soup straight from the container and said it was really good. I said I know. We watched the game. It was a perfectly ordinary evening, the kind you can only have once the hard conversation is behind you. I think that's what I'd want anyone to take from this, if there's something to take. The hard conversation is not the end of the relationship. It might feel that way going in. It felt that way to me. But done with honesty and without cruelty, it can be the thing that saves what's actually worth saving. The most loving thing I ever did for my son was stop making it so easy to take me for granted. I just wish I'd done it sooner.